For 200 miles through endless forests and perilous roads, he ran. His paws bled, his body weakened, but he never stopped. A lost owner, a promise unbroken, and an ending no one expected. The wind howled through the dense Appalachian wilderness, rustling the towering pines that lined the winding roads. The sky was a muted gray, promising an approaching storm, but Rex barely noticed. His amber eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the horizon. His fur, once pristine, was now matted with dust from the long road behind him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Somewhere out there, his master was waiting, alone, lost, and in need of him. Rex was no ordinary dog, a purebred German shepherd. He had been trained for years in search and rescue, his instincts honed through countless hours of discipline, repetition, and devotion. But none of that training compared to the bond he shared with his owner, Daniel. To Rex, Daniel was more than a companion. He was home, the center of his world, the very reason for his existence. Daniel had always known Rex was special. He had picked him as a pup from a litter of 8, the only one who had locked eyes with him without hesitation, as if he had already chosen him. That day, as Daniel had knelt to pick him up, Rex had wagged his tiny tail and pressed his nose against Daniel's palm, sealing a silent vow of loyalty. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Living in the rolling countryside of Tennessee, Daniel had raised Rex with a firm yet gentle hand. Every morning, they would set out into the hills, Rex bounding ahead, ears perked, alert to every sound. Daniel, a former search and rescue officer, had taught him the art of tracking, honing the dog's natural instincts until Rex could find a lost hiker buried under feet of snow or pick up the faintest scent in the thickest underbrush. But beyond training, there was love, a deep, unshakable love. On cold nights, Rex would curl up beside Daniel's bed, his warm breath steady, a silent guardian against the darkness. In the summers, they would swim in the river, the dog launching himself into the water, always circling back to Daniel's side, never straying too far. Every moment of their lives was intertwined, a life of quiet companionship and unwavering trust. The life they built together. Rex had never known fear with Daniel by his side. Whether they were exploring new trails or resting on the porch, he always felt safe. His owner's presence an unspoken promise that nothing in the world could harm him. Daniel spoke to him like a friend, never with commands, but with understanding. "You're my best boy, you know that?" Daniel would say, ruffling Rex's fur as they sat together under the evening sky. Rex would rest his head against Daniel's knee, sighing in contentment, as if to say, "I know. I'll always be here." Their bond was unbreakable, until the day everything changed. The last goodbye. It had started like any other morning. The sun had barely risen, casting golden light across the hills. Birds chirped in the distance, and the crisp autumn air smelled of damp earth and pine. Daniel was packing his truck, loading his search and rescue gear into the back. Rex watched, his ears twitching, his instincts alerting him that something was different. Daniel knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his head. "Not this time, buddy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's just a quick job. I'll be back before you know it." Rex let out a low whine, pressing his nose against Daniel's chest. He didn't understand why he wasn't going. They always went together. Daniel chuckled, scratching behind Rex's ears. I know, but you gotta stay. Keep the house safe for me, okay?" Rex didn't want to stay, but Daniel had asked him to. And if there was one thing Rex knew, it was that he always obeyed his master. He watched as the truck rumbled down the dirt road, disappearing into the trees. He sat by the fence, ears perked, tail still, his eyes fixed on the place where Daniel had vanished. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. Daniel never returned. The silence that followed. The house felt hollow without Daniel. The once familiar walls seemed foreign, the air too still. Rex paced by the door, waiting, ears straining for the sound of the truck's engine. Every time a car passed, he would bolt to the window, heart pounding, only for disappointment to settle deep in his bones when it wasn't Daniel. Neighbors came by, speaking in hushed voices. Their hands were gentle as they tried to comfort Rex, but he ignored them. They weren't Daniel. They didn't matter. Days turned into a week. Then the reports came in. Whispers of a terrible storm, roads washed away, and a rescue mission that had gone horribly wrong. The young boy Daniel had gone to find had been rescued. But Daniel himself was missing. Gone. Lost. The words meant nothing to Rex. All he knew was that Daniel wasn't home. And if Daniel wasn't home, then something was wrong. Rex refused to eat. He refused to sleep. He sat by the door, watching, waiting, his world narrowing down to a single unbearable truth. Daniel needed him. And if no one else would find him, then Rex would. The journey begins. That night, as the wind howled and the sky threatened rain, Rex made his decision. He stood, his powerful frame silhouetted against the dim porch light. His ears twitched as he sniffed the air, catching the faintest trace of Daniel's scent. It was weak, nearly swallowed by time and distance, but it was there. That was all Rex needed. Without hesitation, he leapt over the fence, landing with silent grace on the dirt road. Then he ran. The world blurred around him, fields, houses, roads, all irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the trail. His muscles burned, but he pushed forward. His paws thudded against the earth, his breath steady. He ran through open fields, his keen nose guiding him. He ran past towns, past highways, past the curious gazes of people who didn't understand what drove him. 200 miles stretched between him and Daniel, but distance meant nothing to Rex. His master was out there, and he would find him, no matter what it took. The night swallowed him whole. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of his paws against the damp earth and the distant rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. The forest loomed tall on either side of the winding path, its darkness stretching endlessly in all directions. But Rex didn't care. His heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from urgency. Daniel was out there, lost, alone, waiting for him. The wind carried the scent of rain, heavy and sharp, warning of another storm brewing in the distance. The remnants of the last one still scarred the land, uprooted trees, flooded trails, broken bridges. The river that once flowed gently through the valley now roared, swollen with rainwater, carving through the earth like an open wound. Rex moved with purpose, his body battered but relentless. His paws were cracked, his legs ached from the unending miles he had traveled, but he ignored the pain. The scent was faint but present. Daniel's scent, interwoven with the earth and rain. It was a whisper in the wind, calling him forward. He would not stop. Then, ahead. Trouble. A winding road, the glare of headlights piercing through the darkness. A vehicle, moving too fast, its tires screeching against the wet pavement. Rex barely saw it before it was upon him. A blinding flash of light. A sharp cry, his own. Then, impact. The world spun as his body was thrown sideways, skidding across the gravel shoulder like a discarded rag doll. The pain hit a second later, searing through his ribs, burning hot against the cold night air. For the first time since he had set out, fear gripped him. But before it could take hold, he moved. Lungs burning, he forced himself upright, paws unsteady against the uneven ground. His legs trembled, but he stood firm. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he swallowed the pain. The vehicle had stopped. A door creaked open. Voices, muffled, distant, reached his ears. A man approached, his steps slow, hesitant. "Hey, boy, you okay?" Rex took a step back. "Jesus, I think I hit him." Another voice, softer, female. A flashlight flickered on, its harsh beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating Rex's form. Blood matted his fur where his shoulder had scraped against the road. His breathing was heavy, but his stance was unwavering. "Should we take him to a vet?" The man took another step closer. Rex growled, low, warning. Daniel. He had to find Daniel. And so, without another moment's hesitation, he turned. and ran. The voices behind him faded. The pain lingered, sharp with every movement, but he didn't slow down. Couldn't. He had already lost too much time. The night stretched on. Rex wove through forgotten trails, his keen nose guiding him through the remnants of destruction left in the storm's wake. Hours passed. Then, something new. A clearing. Trees broken. The earth disturbed. The scent of gasoline heavy in the air. Rex slowed, his ears twitching, his body tense. His nose worked furiously, sifting through the layers of scent until… Daniel. The realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. The scent was stronger now, no longer a fading trail but something tangible, recent. He was close. His eyes darted across the wreckage before him. A vehicle, Daniel's truck, half buried beneath a fallen tree, its windshield shattered, the driver's side door flung open. Rex whined, his body rigid with anticipation. Daniel had been here. But where was he now? Panic surged in Rex's chest as he sniffed frantically, his mind racing. The scent led away from the wreckage, deeper into the forest, swallowed by the vast unknown. And then, movement. A sound, faint but distinct, carried through the silence. A groan. Rex's head snapped toward the noise. His paws moved before he could think. He tore through the underbrush, branches snapping under his weight. The scent was overwhelming now, laced with sweat and something else. Something sharp, metallic. Blood. Then he saw him. Daniel. Lying at the base of a steep embankment, half covered in leaves, his body still. Rex let out a sharp bark, his heart pounding as he rushed forward. Daniel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. "Rex!" A strangled whimper escaped the dog's throat as he pressed his nose against Daniel's hand, desperate for reassurance, desperate to prove he was real. Daniel's fingers twitched weakly. "You… found me." But even as relief flooded through Rex, he knew this wasn't over. Daniel was hurt, and they were still miles away from safety. The real fight had only just begun. Rex nudged Daniel's hand again, his wet nose pressing against his master's trembling fingers. The scent of blood was stronger now, sharp and metallic, cutting through the damp earth and pine. Daniel groaned, his breath shallow, his face pale beneath the flickering moonlight that seeped through the branches above. Rex whined, circling Daniel, his body tense with desperation. His master was in trouble. His master needed help. Daniel's lips parted, barely a whisper escaping. "Good boy. You found me." Rex licked Daniel's face, whimpering, but finding him wasn't enough. He had to get him out of here. The forest stretched on for miles in every direction, a vast, untamed wilderness that swallowed the weak without mercy. The storm had stripped away familiar trails, leaving nothing but debris and treacherous ground. The night was growing colder, and Daniel wasn't moving. Rex barked, a sharp, urgent sound. Daniel tried to move, but the pain seized him, his body stiffening as he groaned. I can't." His voice was weak, barely a breath. Rex stepped back, his sharp mind assessing. He sniffed the air, searching for something, anything that could help. His instincts screamed at him. Daniel needed warmth, shelter. If he stayed here, he wouldn't make it through the night. The dog paced around him, ears pinned back, frustration bubbling in his chest. He couldn't leave him. But he also couldn't just sit here and wait. Then, an idea. Rex bent down, taking Daniel's jacket sleeve gently in his teeth. He tugged, pulling him slightly forward. Daniel winced, his body jerking as fresh pain shot through him. He gritted his teeth. "Rex, stop!" But Rex didn't stop. He couldn't. He barked again, more insistent this time. If Daniel wouldn't move on his own, then Rex would help him. With every ounce of strength in his body, he pulled. Daniel gasped, but didn't resist. He let Rex tug at him, dragging him inch by inch across the damp ground. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through him, but he didn't fight it. He trusted Rex. He always had. The German shepherd was relentless, his muscles burning, his body aching, but he didn't stop. He dug his claws into the earth, pulling with all his might, determined to get Daniel to safety. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, shelter. A fallen tree, its thick roots curled upward like protective arms, forming a small alcove beneath it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It would keep Daniel hidden from the worst of the cold. Rex panted, his breath heavy, his legs trembling from exhaustion, but he had done it. He had gotten his master to shelter. Daniel's body slumped against the roots, his breaths ragged, but his eyes flickered open. He gazed at Rex, a weak smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You never give up, do you?" Rex wagged his tail once, just slightly. But the battle wasn't over. Daniel needed warmth. His body was already growing dangerously cold. Rex's sharp instincts kicked in. He curled up beside Daniel, pressing his thick fur against his master's chest. He had seen humans do this before, huddling together for warmth. He could do the same. Daniel let out a soft breath, his fingers weakly gripping Rex's fur. "Good boy." Rex lay still, his heart thudding steadily, his body a shield against the creeping chill of the night. But even as he kept Daniel warm, he knew this wasn't enough. They needed help, and Rex was going to get it. The search for help. The first light of dawn crept through the trees, staining the sky in muted shades of pink and orange. The forest, once shrouded in darkness, now revealed its scars, the fallen branches, the uprooted trees, the trails swallowed by mud. Rex stirred, lifting his head. Daniel was still there, his breathing steady but weak. His skin was cold, his body unmoving. The German shepherd's ears twitched. Time was running out. He licked Daniel's face once, as if to say stay, then stood. He had a new mission now. Find help. Rex bolted into the trees, his legs screaming in protest from exhaustion, but he ignored the pain. He ran with single-minded determination, weaving through the broken landscape, his nose working furiously. Then, something new. Smoke. His heart leaped. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. People meant help. He sprinted toward the scent, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The forest thinned, opening into a dirt road. And there, a cabin. The chimney coughed up wisps of smoke, curling into the morning air. A truck sat parked outside, its engine silent, but the scent of humans lingered. Rex didn't hesitate. He ran straight to the door, barking furiously. Inside, footsteps, a muffled voice. Then, the door swung open. An older man, his face lined with years of work and worry, stared at the frantic dog. "Well, what the hell?" Rex barked again, backing up, then surging forward, his body tense with urgency. The man frowned. "What's got you all riled up, boy?" Rex turned, sprinting a few feet away, then stopped, looking back. He barked again. The man hesitated, then cursed under his breath. "You want me to follow you?" Another bark. The man grabbed his coat. All right, I'm coming." Rex wasted no time. He bolted back into the woods, the man hot on his heels. The trek was slow, too slow. The man's legs weren't built for the terrain the way Rex's were, but the German shepherd didn't stop. Every few seconds he turned back, making sure the human was still behind him. And then, they arrived. Daniel lay motionless beneath the tree, his breathing faint. The man rushed forward, dropping to his knees. "Jesus, this man's half dead." He pressed 2 fingers to Daniel's neck, checking his pulse. Relief flashed across his face. Still alive. Barely. He pulled a radio from his belt. "Got a man down out here. Search and rescue needed ASAP. Severe exposure, possible internal injuries." Rex stood beside Daniel, his body rigid, watching. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, the sound of an approaching vehicle. A second later, voices. People rushing toward them, medical bags in hand. Daniel was lifted onto a stretcher, his body limp, his face pale. Rex followed, never leaving his side. Even as the helicopter arrived, even as Daniel was hoisted into its belly, even as they tried to stop the German shepherd from climbing in, he refused to be left behind. And so, as the blades roared to life, as the ground fell away beneath them, Rex curled up beside Daniel, his head resting against his master's chest, because he had found him, and he would never leave him again. The rhythmic hum of the helicopter's blades filled the air, a deep, steady thumping that echoed in Rex's chest. Wind howled through the open doors as the paramedics worked frantically over Daniel's body, their hands swift and precise, voices clipped with urgency. Rex lay beside Daniel, his head resting against his master's chest, his ears pinned back at the unfamiliar chaos surrounding them. The smell of antiseptic and blood filled the cramped space, but none of it mattered. He had done his job. He had found Daniel, and now it was out of his control. A paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, glanced at Rex. "We need to move him, buddy. You'll have to step back." Rex didn't move. She sighed, then turned to the other medic. "He won't leave him." The man nodded. "Then let him stay." The helicopter pitched slightly as it neared the hospital. Below, the city stretched out in a glittering sea of lights, a stark contrast to the endless wilderness Rex had just fought through. Daniel let out a weak groan, his body stirring slightly. Rex perked up immediately, his nose pressing against Daniel's cheek, willing him to wake up. The paramedics exchanged a glance. "That's a good sign," one of them muttered. As they touched down, the doors burst open. A team of doctors and nurses stood waiting, the air filled with clipped commands and the hurried shuffle of gurney wheels against pavement. They moved Daniel out first. Then came Rex's greatest test. A nurse stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You can't go in there, boy." Rex stiffened. The world suddenly felt too loud, too fast. They were taking Daniel away. A firm hand touched his back. The older man, the one who had followed him into the woods, knelt beside him. His voice was calm, gentle. "Hey now, you've done your part, son. Let them take care of him." But Rex didn't understand why he had to stop now. His master needed him. Daniel was vanishing behind hospital doors, his stretcher swallowed by the chaos of people in white coats. Rex lunged forward. The leash snapped tight. The older man held firm. "Whoa, easy, boy," Rex barked, a deep, desperate sound, his body pulling against the restraint. His heart pounded, panic rising like a flood. He had come so far. He had fought through the worst storms, crossed rivers, ran through fire and exhaustion. He couldn't lose Daniel now. But the doors closed. The world went silent. Rex sat down, his head hanging low, his breath coming in sharp pants. His body ached, his wounds pulsed with dull pain, but none of it compared to the ache of being separated from Daniel. The older man sighed, rubbing Rex's head. "I know, son, I know. But he's in good hands." Rex's ears twitched. The man's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Understanding. Like he had known loss before. The minutes stretched into hours. Rex refused to move from his spot outside the hospital doors. Nurses passed by, some glancing at him with pity, others shaking their heads. Then, a shift, a new scent, familiar. Rex's head snapped up. Daniel. The scent was weak, tangled with medicine and pain, but it was there. The hospital doors opened, a wheelchair, and in it, Daniel. His skin was pale, his face gaunt, but his eyes, those tired, kind eyes, lit up the moment they landed on Rex. A smile, small but real, pulled at Daniel's lips. "Rex." Rex moved before he could think. In a single bound, he crossed the distance, burying his face against Daniel's chest, his tail wagging furiously, his body trembling with relief. Daniel let out a soft laugh, hoarse, tired, but filled with something warm. Love. "You did it, boy," he murmured, his fingers weakly scratching Rex's ears. "You found me." Rex whined, licking Daniel's face, his body pressing as close as possible. He had done it. He had brought him home. And now he would never leave his side again. Rex's body trembled as he pressed against Daniel, his heart thudding in his chest, his breath quick and uneven. The relief was overwhelming, washing over him in waves. He had found his master. He had saved him. Daniel chuckled weakly, his fingers threading through Rex's thick fur. His touch was weak, but it was there. Real. Alive. "You never gave up, did you, buddy?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it held all the warmth Rex had been missing. Rex let out a soft whimper, licking Daniel's hand, his tail wagging weakly. The older man who had followed Rex to the hospital, the one who had seen him fight for Daniel, stood off to the side, watching with something unreadable in his gaze. Then he let out a long sigh, shaking his head. "I've seen loyal dogs before, but you, boy, you're something else." A nurse gently tapped Daniel's shoulder. "We need to get you back inside, Mr. Carter. You still have a long way to go." Daniel sighed but nodded, his body slumping with exhaustion. Yeah, I know." The nurse hesitated. "And your dog?" Daniel looked down at Rex, his tired smile widening. "He stays with me." The nurse bit her lip. "Hospital policy? I don't care about hospital policy." Daniel's voice was firm, stronger than it had been since they found him. "If he hadn't tracked me through the forest, I wouldn't be sitting here. He's not just a dog. He's my partner." Rex straightened, as if he understood. The nurse hesitated but eventually sighed, shaking her head. "I'll see what I can do." They wheeled Daniel back inside, and for the first time since Rex had started his journey, he didn't feel the need to run, because Daniel was safe. The recovery. The days stretched on, but Rex never left Daniel's side. Hospital beds, sterile air, and the constant beeping of monitors became their new normal. Daniel's body had taken a beating, broken ribs, dehydration, a concussion, but with time, he healed. And through it all, Rex remained his shadow. The nurses quickly learned not to separate them. Rex would sit by Daniel's bedside, his head resting on the mattress, his amber eyes watching every movement. When the pain became too much for Daniel, Rex was there. When nightmares of the storm and the wreck woke him in the middle of the night, Rex would nudge him, grounding him in the present. "You know," Daniel murmured one evening, his fingers brushing through Rex's fur, "I should have known you wouldn't just sit and wait for me." Rex let out a soft huff. "I don't even know how you did it," Daniel continued. 200 miles, alone, through storms, highways, and God knows what else." He shook his head. "You're incredible, buddy." Rex simply closed his eyes, letting Daniel's voice lull him into contentment. The older man who had helped them, Hank, as they learned, visited every day. He had been the one to spread Rex's story, telling anyone who would listen about the dog who had tracked his owner across impossible terrain. It wasn't long before the hospital staff started whispering about Rex, then local news stations picked up the story, and just like that, Rex became a legend. A hero's welcome. By the time Daniel was well enough to leave the hospital, the world outside had changed. Cameras flashed as the automatic doors slid open. Reporters, journalists, and strangers who had heard Rex's story gathered outside, eager to catch a glimpse of the dog who had crossed mountains and rivers for the one he loved. Daniel blinked at the crowd. "Well, that's new." Rex tilted his head, confused by the sudden commotion. A woman stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Carter, can you tell us what it feels like to be reunited with your dog after such an incredible journey?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to say, really. He's always been by my side. This is just who he is." He looked down at Rex, a slow smile forming. "Loyal to the very end." Another reporter chimed in. "Experts say it's unheard of for a dog to track a single scent across that much distance, especially through such dangerous conditions. Do you think Rex knew exactly where you were?" Daniel exhaled, his eyes softening as he scratched behind Rex's ears. "I think—" He paused, then nodded. "Yeah, I think he did, and I think he never once doubted he'd find me." Rex wagged his tail, pressing against Daniel's leg. More questions came. People wanted to know what was next for them, if Rex would receive an award, if they would tell their story on television. Daniel wasn't interested in any of it. All that mattered was that they were together again. Home. The ride back was quiet. The storm had long passed, but the land still bore its scars: fallen branches, muddy roads, broken fences. But the house still stood. Rex jumped out of the truck the moment the door opened, racing up the steps and pushing his nose against the front door. Daniel chuckled as he climbed out after him. "Hold on, buddy." He unlocked the door and stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of home. Everything was exactly as he had left it, but it felt different, warmer. Rex padded through the house, sniffing everything, checking every room as if to make sure it was still safe. Then, finally, he returned to Daniel's side, sitting at his feet. Daniel sank onto the couch with a deep sigh, rubbing his ribs. He had survived. They both had. Rex curled up beside him, resting his head on Daniel's knee. Silence settled between them. Not the heavy, aching silence from before, but something peaceful. Daniel ran a hand through Rex's fur, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks for coming back for me." Rex exhaled, his body relaxing completely. Because he knew. He always would. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm flickers of light across the wooden walls of the cabin. The storm had long passed, but the echoes of what had happened lingered in every breath Daniel took, in every glance he shared with the dog curled up beside him. Rex lay stretched out on the rug, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. His fur had been cleaned, his wounds treated, and for the first time in weeks, he was truly at peace. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching him. The world had exploded with their story. News articles, television specials, even offers for interviews. Everyone wanted to talk about the German shepherd who had done the impossible, who had tracked his lost owner for miles with nothing but sheer determination and love. But none of those people had been there. None of them had seen Rex, battered and bleeding, still running through the storm. None of them had felt the desperation of being lost, the cold grip of fear, the quiet certainty that hope was slipping away, only to have it restored by the touch of a familiar paw. No, Daniel thought, they would never truly understand. And that was okay. Because Rex wasn't a hero for the cameras or for the headlines. He was a hero because that's who he was. Because that's what love does. Daniel reached down, running his